As I promised last week, if you remember, we're looking at this month. If you come back and you worship with us at night, we're looking at different people as they faced life altering decisions. And tonight we're looking at, and last week we looked at brothers, different brothers in the Bible. And tonight we're looking specifically at David because there's several. I mean, this is a man that I'm not telling you anything new, but his life was filled with opportunities to do bad, right? And filled with opportunities to turn away from God and different uh, uh, times in his life where he could have gone a multitude of different ways. But at the end of his life, he's called a man after God's own heart. And there's something to be said about that. So we're looking tonight at three different instances, three different situations that David faced, in which two of them he made a great decision, and one of them not so good. And they changed his life. First, let's go and let's look at chapter 17 in 1 Samuel. The first two are in 1 Samuel, and the third one is in 2 Samuel. But let's look first at 1 Samuel chapter 17, and this is our favorite story about David as he meets Goliath, right? We love talking about this, and we love telling our little children that there was this little boy that faced this giant. And some manuscripts, over 9 feet tall was this man. And he looked him straight in the eye and said, I can do this. So, and we love talking about and giving them courage and strength, and rightfully so. But David wasn't even supposed to be in the army. And he arrives at this life-altering moment where he chooses to do the right thing. You remember the story, right? He's coming to his oldest three brothers. His oldest three brothers are in the army, and his father sends him to check on his oldest three brothers to bring them some food and to get something in return, a token to make sure that they're okay. So David arrives, and he's checking on them. And as he's there, here comes down in the valley Goliath, challenging the armies of Israel. For 40 days, he challenged the armies of Israel. If you win, we will serve you. But if I win, you will be our slaves. Choose a man and come out and fight me. For 40 days. And you can hear the echo and the laughter and just the sheer mocking that was going on for 40 days, and the shame that accompanied that. But it would seem that on the 40th day, David arrives. And here's Goliath. And what do you what do you do? If I'm honest with myself, I was like, man, I ain't a soldier. Why don't you get out there and get him, right? Pat him on the back, send him on their way. Go get him. But David takes it upon himself, doesn't he? And I want to point us and lead us as we move through this, very quickly. And, most of us are familiar with this, looking out at the crowd. Probably many of us, or if not all of us, have heard this since we were a little child. But this story, I want to move through this story in a way in which David talks. Because look at what he says to the soldiers, first of all. Look at what he says to the soldiers, right? He's there and he's on the front lines, and he says, hey, why hasn't anybody stopped this guy? And look what he says to them in verse 26. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 26. Look at what he says to the soldiers. He says this. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So his brothers are there, the king is there, and here's the whole host of the Israelites that are standing in this battle array at the camp, and they're being made fun of by this guy, this giant that is on the other side of the creek. But David doesn't call their attention to the army of Israel, and he doesn't call the attention to his brothers or to the king. Who is this uncircumcised Israel that he should defy the armies of the living God? You see, it's interesting because he arrives at this point in his life, this juncture, and he is already impressed with the fact that this is the army of God, right? It's not the army of Saul. It's not the army that his brothers are a part of. It's the army of the living God. So what David is more focused on is the reproach that is on God rather than the reproach that is on Israel. So we move from his conversation, what he says to the soldiers, to what he says to the king next in verse 37, right? Because word gets back to King Saul, hey, somebody's here, and he's going to fight. Bring him here. Let's see what he has to say. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. But it's interesting, right? Because David, he's been a shepherd, and he's already defeated the lion and the bear, right? He's already defeated the lion and the bear. And did he do it by himself? Because it would seem that he's all alone, right? Guarding the sheep. It would seem as if he is by himself and he has to protect the sheep from this bear and from this lion. He says, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will also deliver me. Again, he comes back to God, doesn't he? It's you have defied the armies of the living God, and now he says, the Lord will deliver me. It's not, I am great. I've already killed a lion and I've already killed a bear. I'll kill this guy too. It's the Lord's going to take care of me. The Lord's going to deliver me. It's important to understand that. So, Saul puts his armor on David, and in vain, you remember David tries to go, and he says, I haven't tested these in battle. So he puts them off, and then he walks down to the brook, 5 stones, puts them in his pouch, a slingshot. And here comes Goliath. Don't you wish you could be there? Don't you wish you could see it? Goliath starts in. Am I a dog? Am I a dog that you come to me with rocks, sticks, and stones? And he says, cursed him by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. I mean, how ruthless this man must be in the face of this teenager, right? To say, come here, I'm going to kill you and I'm going to give your body to the birds and the beasts. I ain't even going to bury you. I'm going to kill you and leave you for dead. But the reply, David spoke to the soldiers one way, spoke to King Saul. Now look at what he says to the enemy here as he replies back to Goliath. In verse 45, he says, you come to me with sword and spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord. This is my favorite part of this entire story, is when David comes face to face with a man that is perhaps two times his height. And he knows this man has been battle tested. And he says, you come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord. Right? He didn't have anything else. He didn't have a sword. He didn't have a spear. He had 5 rocks. And I come to you in the name of the Lord. The hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Man, something about that just gets you fired up, doesn't it? He says, come here, Goliath to David, come here, and I will give your body to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. And David retaliates and says, I'm going to give the host of the Philistines to the beasts of the field and to the birds of the air, and I'm going to chop off your head, so that everybody knows that the Lord saves. Now a sword and spear, the battle is already the Lord's. 4 times, if you're reading through verse 45 through verse 47, you're going to see David reference Jehovah, Yahweh, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. The Lord saves. The Lord will deliver you. The Lord has the battle already won. God, 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 God. David approaches this man, this behemoth of a man, and with the audacity of a teenager, but yes, he comes to him in the name of the Lord. David made the decision when the whole host of Israel, all these brave men of Israel, turned their backs and said, no way. David made the decision. The Lord can deliver. The Lord can save. In fact, the battle is already the Lord's. And the rest is history. From that battle, the saying was going around after, of course, David sunk that rock into his forehead and did, in fact, chop off his head. David has, or Saul rather, has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And everybody loved David, everybody praised David, which leads us to our second important decision and how David treated Saul. Because after all, wasn't Saul the king? Here is this ruddy, handsome little fella that comes out of nowhere and defeats this giant that nobody could stand against. And now everybody is in love with David. And as a result, Saul got very, very jealous. In fact, he got so jealous, you remember David was requested that he would come into the presence of Saul and that he would play his lyre, right? He would play his instrument and to soothe the soul, it says, soothe the soul of Saul. Well, on one such instance, we read this in the next chapter, chapter 18. Saul has struck down his thousands and David his tens of thousands. That's verse 7 of chapter 18. And then in verse 10, the next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raged within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul hurled his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. He wanted to kill him. 2 times, right? If you keep reading, but David evaded him twice. Saul tried to kill David twice. After David saved Israel from the shame and the mockery of this giant, Saul tried to kill him. Not just once, but twice. I don't know. I would have probably left after the first time. Don't you? But twice. The king tried to pin David to the wall. What do? Someone is literally trying to kill you. They hate you so much. There is such a root of bitterness in their soul that they want to kill you, what do? David's got an important decision to make, doesn't he? After all, self-defense, nobody on earth would blame you if you killed somebody because they were trying to kill you. Nobody would think twice about it. And after all, you remember before David went into battle with Goliath, you remember that very important and significant event that happened in David's life? Samuel came to his house and he was anointed king. Nobody would blame him because after all, he is the rightful king. What would you do? In 1 Samuel chapter 24, Saul more or less runs David out of the kingdom because he seeks his life. So David's on the run with several hundred of his men. Here they arrive in 1 Samuel chapter 24. They arrive at the cave. And beginning in verse 4, they see Saul. They're hiding deep inside the cave, and Saul comes into the cave, at the mouth of the cave, to relieve himself. And the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you." Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now wait a minute, pause, and what would you do? David is at a life-altering decision right here. Here is this man that is trying to kill you, and he is sitting here, literally, with his pants down. And what would you do? You've got him right where you want him. He goes up and he cuts off a corner of his robe. And afterward, in verse 5, David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. But Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. It would have made much more sense for David just to kill Saul and end the whole thing right there, wouldn't it? I mean, in the whole plan, it would make things so much easier. But he doesn't. And now let's go to chapter 26 and look at another instance, because Saul doesn't give up. They arrive at the wilderness in chapter 26, actually, in the wilderness of Ziph. And while they are there, the thing happens again. Saul is there, and his guard is down. And David and his men see the opportunity, and David's one of his most valiant men, Abishai, said to David in verse 8 of chapter 26, "God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth." Now what did Saul want to do to David? Oh, that's right, pin him to the wall. So Abishai says, "Let me go pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" And David said, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, for he will go down into the battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now take the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let us go." This story, every time I read it, I get frustrated because I've seen enough Western movies to know how this should play out. The bad guy's in a bad spot, and the good guy should take out the bad guy. But he doesn't. Both instances, how David describes the king tells us everything that we need to know. Who will stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? The Lord's anointed. In fact, he elaborates and he says, the Lord will strike him down, or his day will come to die. But it ain't going to be me. Why, oh, why, oh, why? David shows why he has the heart of God in this instance. David was at a crossroads, and David made one of perhaps the hardest decisions in his life. Leaving the man that was trying to kill him, leaving him to the hand of God, and trusting that God was going to take care of it. Let's look at it one last critical decision in David's life. In 2 Samuel chapter 11. The story of, Bathsheba. The story of Bathsheba. Very quickly, I want to read through several of these passages and ask a few simple questions. 2 Samuel chapter 11, beginning in verse 2. Look at what it says here. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. One question. Where is God? Where's God in that whole passage? David did this, David did this, David did this. There is no God. Keep reading with me. Look at verse 6. So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David, and Uriah came to him. David asked how Joab was doing and how the people were doing and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house, and all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. One question. Where is the Lord? Where is God? In all this, David did this, David did this, and David did this. Where is God? Keep reading. Look at verse 12 with me. Then David said to Uriah, we're still trying to cover up this whole shenanigans. Then David said to Uriah, remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of the Lord, but he did not go down to his house. One question. Where is God? David did this. David did that. Where's God? Verse 14. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, set Uriah at the forefront of the hardest fighting and then draw back from him that he may be struck down and die. Where is God? You remember, you go back to Goliath. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? The Lord will strike you down. The battle is already the Lord's. I'm not going to stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Who can, to Abishai, stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and remain guiltless? And then you arrive at the scene with Bathsheba. Where is God? God has been with him all along. Where is God now? Leave you with one passage from Proverbs, ironically, chapter 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Crossroads. How do you know the right decision to make? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. You see, if David had done that all along, Bathsheba would have never happened. The decisions that you make today, tomorrow, and moving forward in your life, lean not on your own understanding, and he will make your paths straight. The lesson's yours. What will you do with it? I hope it's encouraging. I hope it's also exhorting. I know it certainly has been for me.